And it says we are live, so...
And hey, everyone, it's Evan Kirstel with the Doug, Dave, and Evan show. Would you call this a pregame? Is this like the pregame show? Can we call it that? I haven't seen other pregame CES shows.
Well, more like a stream of consciousness, because there's so much news flying around. It's like, the proverbial explosion at the bologna factory, and everything's flying around, and it's trying to come up with what's really happening.
All right, well, let's dive right in. For those who are uninformed, there's a big event called the Consumer Electronics Show that's happening in a couple of weeks, under a couple of weeks. And there is a lot of storm and drang around the event, to say the least. So, Dave, why don't you set the scene? Oh, we have a special guest joining as well. Just
Gary
from
Arlen?
the audience here, last minute entree to the club here. I'm sorry, it's all guys. It's just the usual challenges. But
I did reach out.
Dave, why don't you give us your perspective? Where are you personally with CES, and what's the state of play with the event itself?
Well, it's actually really fascinating. You guys know that I'm a trade show hound, or whatever word you want to use for that. That's more or less appropriate or politically correct. But I go to a lot of the conferences, and there haven't been a lot of very safe ones. A couple of them kicked back off, in Florida, and I don't consider Florida very safe, so I avoided them. But CES is the biggest conference of the year. It's the most important conference of the year for me. We missed it in person last year. The virtual show, had a lot of mixed reviews. There were a lot of things that didn't work very well, and we were all really looking forward to having the show this year. And I have to tell you, as we've seen COVID twist and turn and change and all the horrific stuff that came about with it, you often see exhibitors pulling out of shows. That the exhibitor is not going to come, that they're not going to do it. This is the first time in my life that I've seen attendees, big name attendees, saying they're not going to attend the show. And it's kind of surprising and kind of scary. I mean, my opinion about it, at this point, I'm still going. My opinion about it right now is you're going to catch COVID if you're not vaccinated. You're not boosted, and you're eating in public, indoors without a mask. These are, very inexpensive, disposable N95 masks. You can get a whole bunch of them. I'm going to wear it for everything. I'm not going to talk to anybody who isn't wearing it. I'm not going to eat in indoor restaurants. So I don't see the danger. And on top of that, Doug, I think it's really, you were commenting on this yesterday. I'll let you. I don't think we have ever seen news entities decide all at the same time on the same day that they're not going to be attending a show, but they're still going to give it full coverage.
Well,
now let me say, I know full well that CES is going to stream the keynotes, and CES is going to stream, some of the press conferences. Wonderful. But what other full coverage is there if you're not there, unless it's some news that somebody's already paid you to run? So I'm very skeptical, very weird about the whole thing.
Well, I don't, the question, I guess the basic question, Dave, and I think you and I are on the same wavelength to this, is that your preventative measure, last week and this week, nothing has changed about the fact that if you don't want to get COVID, A, you should be triple vaxxed, okay, 2 shots and a booster. B, you should be wearing N95 masks. C, the only change in my behavior is going to be that I'm eating in my room, and it's either carry out or DoorDash. I mean, and that, I was in Las Vegas in September for the IWCE show, and, I was a little bit more cavalier on what I was doing. I went to the buffets, love me some buffet. And, but, now with Omicron, you have to be more, you have to be tighter. Your mentality has to be spring before you got the vaccine, rather than now where it's like everybody let it slide. So from that perspective, I'm in the same camp that you are, Dave. I'm pretty much assured to go unless A, CES cancels, or B, my wife threatens to divorce me because she's, but those are my issues. Those are not the holistic issues. Now, what concerns me is that, The Verge made this announcement, and they said the timing the timing annoyed me, number one, and number two is that there was a comment, because the comment made by The Verge was that, hey, we made our decision last week, and we had to talk to some people before we announced that we were not going. And then they decide to announce on Tuesday morning that they're not going. And then all of a sudden you see the dominoes of, Tech Radar, TechCrunch, CES. Everybody decides that they're gonna join this posse. And, I don't know, I'm curious. I wish The Verge would come out and say, who did we talk to last week and why, before we made this announcement on Tuesday morning, which is, as PR people know, is, prime time in the week that, you're going to let people know that you've got news. Okay. It wasn't on the weekend they decided to announce. It wasn't on, because we're in with social media, we're in a 24/7 news cycle. It wasn't on the weekend. It wasn't, on Monday. It wasn't on Friday where it would get lost in the noise. It was on Tuesday morning, ET. So, my question to The Verge people would be like, tell us who else you talked to in the background, because clearly you had one or more conversations before you decided to announce this decision to the world. And I guess second would be that if was one of those conversations with Consumer Technology Association, CTA, the people who are putting on CES. Beyond that, before I let Greg jump in, I have the microphone. The other point of 2 points of consideration I'll throw out. Number one, last week in New Orleans, the American Geophysical Union had their conference of 10,000 people. And they have, for the last week, they've been publishing statistics that they've gathered from their members on who got COVID. And out of 10,000 people that attended the show, self-reported, i.e., self-reported by scientists, because, who goes to AGU, but scientists, they have 62 cases, and out of that 10,000 people. So that's, less than 1%. So from a risk factor of attending and not knowing out of that, less than 1% what their protocols were at the show versus now, that's an acceptable risk to me. And,
well, it should be everybody's individual risk, and I'm not questioning that at all. People need to make whatever decisions they're comfortable making. But yeah, when news organizations decide to make news instead of break news, and then come up with this insane thing that they're going to give it full coverage anyway, like, yeah, where did that coverage come from, and who paid for it? And if you're not going to be there, how can you claim you're going to have full coverage?
Well,
it stinks.
Well, Dave, the other thing, and then I'm going to shut up to let Greg talk. The other thing is that there's a hashtag circulating around it. I don't know when it got started. And it's like hashtag cancel CS 2022. And, did that get started before this announcement? Did that get started when this announcement took place? I don't know. But, and I don't want to be Joe conspiracy theory, but, I think some people have the agenda that they want to claim that they canceled CES before CES canceled, and I'm not, and I'm not saying specifically that one of these news organizations that was involved in this announcement yesterday, that was their agenda, but clearly there are some people for whatever reason.
It's the Russians, it's the Chinese.
Yeah, well,
but Greg, so let's shift gears to you. You've been listening patiently. I consider you among the tech Illuminati of consumer electronics. You're kind of the pulling the strings of everything cool that's happening in tech. Why don't you introduce yourself and share us, your personal and professional thoughts on the show and what you're planning to do.
Very kind of you, Evan, and thanks for inviting me on today. Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Kahn. I lead the Emerging Tech Exchange, which is a group of dozens of corporate startups and the public sector that are pioneering new technologies, from crypto to the metaverse to connected devices and autonomous vehicles. I also have a venture firm called GK Digital Ventures, where I invest in tech-enabled media companies. Look, I think we're all living in unprecedented times, but specific to CES, there are really three different constituents that are at work here. One, I think Doug and David did a good job of speaking about, which was the press, the media side of the business. There are the exhibitors, and then there are the attendees who are having meetings or walking around the show floor. So we've spoken about the press. There's definitely been a groundswell of journalists that have decided either individually or collectively that they want to skip this year. The second piece, which is the exhibitors, many of which have not pulled out. In fact, I would say arguably almost all of which of the major ones have not pulled out to date. And then there's the third that are the attendees, and I would say that it's a mixed bag. I'm hosting about 8 different events at CES. I've had no indications of pullouts to this point. That doesn't mean that things won't change in 24 or 48 hours or even up till the day beforehand, but I've had no pullouts to date. And I think the question, gentlemen, to ponder as we're now approaching the second year of this virus is, what are the appropriate things to do in public as it relates to business events and summits, and what are the things that just should be changed for good? And what I'm grappling with, coming on the heels of President Biden's speech yesterday about guidance coming into the holiday season, and thinking about trade shows, and not just CES, but NRF coming in a week later, and South by Southwest and Mobile World Congress and many others around the world. The guidance is if you're vaccinated, and they're using the word boosted, and I'll get back to that in a quick second. But if you're vaccinated and boosted, that you should be fine to go to these sort of shows. Wear a mask, wear N95s, and get your vaccinations. I said I'd come back to the word booster because I'd like to banish that word from the American press and call it a third dose or vaccination. They call it a fourth dose already in Israel. And the reason for that is I think there's a lot of questions from folks is what does fully vaccinated mean, even as it relates to CES? Is it that you've gotten 3 doses of a Pfizer or Moderna, or is it that you've gotten from another manufacturer, or you've only gotten 2? So if you say that the complete cycle at this point is 3 doses, then I think it reduces some of that complexity. And we know that the science has shown that the third dose is critical to at least deflecting the severity of Omicron. So that's important in context of all of these types of events. But I think we're going to have to get back to a place where we do convene in person again. Is that there are major psychological effects over the past 2 years. The way that I have always looked at CES, of course, it's a showcase of new technologies, but you can't replace the physical networking. It's the one time a year that everybody in every industry that digital touches comes together. So there's the networking and the business development cycle of it, and the inspiration cycle of just seeing the new technologies that are coming to fold. And we don't have that many showcases in the US for new technologies, and CES has always served an important role in that. My hope is that perhaps we don't have as big shows in the future, and there are more boutique shows around the country, frankly, more regional, and where technology plays more of a centerpiece. So maybe hopefully this is the start of that. And, we plan to produce our own set at ETX and GK Digital Ventures. But Evan, that's kind of a snapshot on what I'm seeing heading into CES.
Well, as always, Greg, very logical and insightful. Great analysis, I think, of where we are. For me, as an industry observer, individual influencer type, it wasn't so much the fear factor in my canceling my trip. I'm triple boosted, as we say, Team Moderna, so I feel pretty safe. It was more the fun factor. I mean, I just don't think it's that fun going around in a mask, 100% mask, not participating in evening activities, not hitting the casinos, not going out to the restaurants. It's like that was always for me the fun part of CES and most events. And with Omicron, which, by the way, just to touch base on the science, has a doubling factor of between 2 and 3 days. So if you look at Delta, it was about 4 or 5 days to double its spread in the population. The original Alpha version of COVID was about a week. Basically, which means we're going to see roughly at peak about 1 million cases, quote unquote, per day in the US in about 10 days. That's going to be kind of a heavy burden to live with, regardless of how dosed, how optimistic, how masked you are. and this is a serious outbreak, mainly for the unvaccinated or under-vaccinated, and it's just kind of a bit heavy for me to go to an event which is supposed to be about having fun and kind of partying and being optimistic and outgoing. So that was, again, my personal calculus. And what do you think, Dave? Are you going to be out there partying at the casinos? I suspect not.
Evan, I completely respect your opinion and the idea that you have that you really want to protect yourself based on what you're looking for. But I will tell you, as a veteran of CES for, I guess, 3 decades now, now there are people more than me, but not much. There is absolutely nothing fun about CES.
Yeah.
It is some of the hardest working days that I put in. And
we have very different perspectives on work. I think that's
about 10 or 12 years ago, I finally came to the conclusion that there's absolutely no way for one person to cover the show. So you just have to pick and choose what you're going to go to. There are some must-see events. There are some, on the floor and off the floor. Some of the off-the-floor events that are done by some of the associated companies that put these things on. Part of the beauty of that is running into friends there, and they have an open bar and they have a buffet table. And if I do that this year, I'm going to keep my mask on. I'm not going to eat, just like you're talking about, Doug. The eating is going to take place outdoors or in the room. There are about 5, 6, 7, 8 really good outdoor restaurants in Las Vegas that are still open that have heaters. Mon Ami Gabi, right? Across the street from the Bellagio at Paris is one of them. So there are things that you can do, but it's work. It's long days. It's long hours. The fun part is about learning the trends that you're going to see in technology that'll play out over the next 18 to 24 months and staying on top of things. And I 100% respect people. There might be some people that are immunocompromised, that are in the middle of, dealing with health challenges, or that just don't want to take the risk because they have, relatives, that it's just too much for them, or they did want to go and do part work and part fun.
It's a mild illness, which it will likely be, even asymptomatic. And you got to quarantine for 10 days. And who the hell wants to do that? So there are so many wrinkles to this whole thing.
I support what individuals might or might not want to do. My concern is when, think about what it means to be journalism. Think about what it means to be in news. You growing up, we were seeing, Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite reporting from battle zones.
Some of us were. You're very old.
I'm sorry. The gray's hereditary. You get it from your kids. I mean, the job of a news organization, no matter how special they are, is to be on site for us, so we don't need to be there, as protected as they can be to cover the stories. And if you get these supposedly reputable news organizations, as Doug pointed out, all pulling out on the same day and the same time, but then adding an addendum that says, oh, but we're going to give you full coverage, I really, like I said before, I question what that coverage entails. The CES is not going to stream that much content.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is going to be things that companies have pushed to them on press releases, or perhaps pushed to them with payments as press releases. That's not coverage of CES.
So you're
that's
saying
startup businesses.
You're saying we send correspondents to war zones to risk their lives, but we can't send correspondents to Vegas, Doug? Is that
Evan, I think there are 3 threads I want to touch. One what Dave said, and and circle back to what Greg said. We covered but the Olympics were covered during COVID with and again, different strain, mixing apples and oranges, but we managed to cover the Olympics. The bubble for the NBA season, that worked okay. We're kind of like in a middle ground. We're kind of in a middle ground here where we know a lot more about the characteristics of this particular virus, and we can protect ourselves, and we're not in an area of fear and ignorance. And I'm feeling that right now we're trying to find that, Omicron has triggered a lot of folks in terms of buttoning down. And I'm not sure if, I'm still thinking that through, but, back to the point of, we covered the Olympics. My God, CES is the technology Olympics. And if we can't figure out a way to safely do that, as I think that Dave and I agree you can do, then 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 they should pull the plug. I think the other point I wanted to roll back to is in terms of what Greg mentioned about vaccination policy. If I have to throw one rock at CES, their vaccination policy is based upon WHO guidelines rather than, I guess, the latest US guidelines for health. In other words, i.e., the US policy right now is get 3 shots. And out of those 3 shots, the 3 acceptable vaccines are basically the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson, although Johnson & Johnson is the bottom of the list. We won't talk about that. The WHO guidance has this, there's no, CES has just recommended or encourages you to get a 3rd shot. And I'm a little, they're a little behind the curve on that, number one. Number two, if you go and you look at what's acceptable for WHO, World Health Organization, they've got the Sinovac vaccine and another vaccine that aren't so great against Omicron. And if you go, again, I'll use AGU's event last week.
You're not Sputnik based? You're not Sputnik vaccinated, Doug? I thought you got a couple of Sputnik shots.
No. I couldn't get it smuggled in there due to the supply chain problems. But the issue here is that AGU looked at all this stuff and said, out of all these, the World Health Organization has done blah 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 XYZ, but and I have to go back and look at the State Department website. The 2 vaccines that are approved by WHO aren't that effective against Omicron. And I'm pretty sure that State Department has said, well, if you have this vaccine or this vaccine, that, you're not going to be able to get in the U.S. And I think, so my net summary from that rambling discourse is that, I wish CES would have been a little bit more proactive rather than encourage people. They should have said, you need to do this. You need to do this. And it's in that respect, they've been a little bit behind the curve. Like, I think, and the other summation I'll say is that I don't think CES expects to have a lot of international people. That's been baked in even before Omicron, because when they issued their updated guidance on how they were going to process people for proof of vaccination, international is like, bring your papers. They're not doing it electronically. You bring your papers. So that implies to me that they don't expect to have a lot of international folks show up, because if they're going to have to sit there and look at everybody's paperwork for international vaccination, I wouldn't want to do that if I had 1,000 folk coming in or that.
Great point. And Greg, so what do you think? How important now is CES in light of its sort of somewhat diminished status? Is it still the Olympics for consumer tech and beyond? And what will how will it set the stage for next year?
Look, great question, Evan. It's obviously important because we're having a whole live stream about it. So I would say that it's.
Well, I do that all the time about nothing. So
well, there you go on that. Here's what I would say. I think the sand is shifting, and as it is just in society, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that a lot of the individual exhibitors have started to create their own events, and that's happened over the last decade or so. To better control their own message and frankly the attendance. The second is that everything is being digitally transformed, and so what used to be an exhibition of buyers and sellers around consumer electronics is now trying to serve many audiences and doing some better than others. And so I think there are more niche conferences that service. Of course, there's J.P. Morgan Chase's healthcare summit, which was due to take place the week after CES, focused on healthcare and health tech.
It's a double super spreader feature.
There you go, and that went virtual, Evan. But here's the third thing: is that I think that every show, including CES, needs to do, if it's addressing technology, needs to step up the game of actually using the technology in the show. This is no longer new. We're 2 years into this, and so my desire at this point would have been, if we're talking about the metaverse, that we could be experiencing CES in the metaverse in a real way, that we could be experiencing, contactless surfaces and in terms of entering and exiting CES, And so I think that part of a technology show going forward is about using the technology to actually put on the show and speak to the audience in that way and making it more relevant. And so I do think that shows need to evolve, CES and others, to kind of meet the need of the marketplace now as well. Because if it's supposed to be a showcase for the best of technology, then it should kind of be run that way. And so that's what we're going to be experimenting with over the next year. Is I think we will have some version of hybrid going forward in almost every major tech show. The question is can hybrid be more than just a digital panel? And can it really be utilizing all the different services and devices that we talk about on a daily basis in our jobs?
Well, hybrid is. I'll just comment on that. The hybrid is very important, especially we've learned now that we've leveled the playing field for the disabled and people who are not able to travel, that they can now attend and be part of conferences that they were never able to do before. And I think that's a door that we've knocked down that we need to really keep open no matter what's going on.
And people like, stay-at-home parents and elderly. Right. There's a whole mass segment
that we've now allowed in that we should never shut out again. But, see, the charm of CES is not just going, to the Samsung or the LG booth and watching, the whatever they've done with their digital screens to make it look like, waterfall in the skies. That everybody's covering. The charm of CES is Eureka Park. It's the startups that are exhibiting. It's some of the things you didn't know to expect. And that's why, I go back to the concept of news and journalism again. That's what needs to be covered. That's what I focus on when I go. What are the things that nobody else are really looking at? And I don't know how you can have virtual coverage of that. For years, and I've spoken to the folks at CTA about this in the past as well, I think that CES needs to be split into two different things, a showcase and exhibit of technology, and then separately a conference of ideas. Because I'm a little bit tired of walking football field size booths at a conference that are nothing but a concept. It's like you could have told me the concept. I didn't need to be walking past the booth to do that. So I think we're going to cut down on size. We're going to cut down on attendance for a little while. But I agree completely with Greg that these things need to be virtual. That we need to be able to have the ability to do them online as well. But the charm of not knowing what you're going to see, not knowing what to expect because everybody's coming to the same place, is important serendipity. And I support the idea of going and covering that as long as we can do it safely.
David, can I just build one just quick build on your point about walking the halls? And I think, we have to also think about logistics in these shows, all sorts of logistics, but also the physical footprint at some of these shows are just too great. It's too difficult to get across town. And you can say the same thing about MWC and other major shows as well. But this is where it could be really interesting to introduce the sort of new technologies, including augmented reality. And so there is a serendipity of just walking through Eureka Park and et cetera. But there is something to be said about if you could get information about what you might want to be seeing before, so you don't have to walk through the entire hall to get there. When you get to the airport or the weeks prior, you can sort of get a visual of what might be there and then pinpoint, sort of put down exactly the booths that you want to go check out. That's where technology could be really interestingly introduced into these types of formats. There will always be folks that don't want to do that, but I think giving people the option of, rather than wading through a football field size of vendors, is something that a lot of people would find useful.
Well, don't forget that this is a business. It's a business for CTA. It's a business for the other people putting on the conferences. There's no reason in the world why we couldn't take everything that's at the Sands this year, or the Venetian they're calling it now, and put it into what they've determined to be the empty South Hall, so that nobody has to get on a bus. Okay, the reason they didn't do that is because they have some type of contractual arrangement with the Venetian. So, you can't separate out the economics from it, but I agree with you. There's got to be a better way.
I'm gonna agree with Greg in part, and I'm gonna disagree with him violently in part. Where I'm gonna agree violently, where I'm gonna agree with him in part is that smaller shows, there's an attraction to smaller shows, and I think some of this cancel CES hate is based on the experience of the pre-COVID experience of, hey, I'm going to Vegas with 180,000 of my not best friends, and then you oversaturate that city and you make it a pain in the neck to go anywhere. So smaller shows sound attractive. And number one. Number two is that if CTA wanted to do smaller shows, they already have the DMARC. They have the C space, which is over at the Aria and One Hotel. They could do the Venetian and Eureka Park, do that as a separate show. And they can do all the crap that they've got over at LVCC as a third separate show if they wanted to do it. Now, the question is, there's, economics and long-term contracts. Don't know. Now, Greg, where I'm going to disagree with you violently from my perspective is that, you know what? I get email pitches every day. If I wanted, I had the virtual experience last year with CES, and, there are other mechanisms, email, social media, where if I quote unquote want to get more information and, and don't have to be there, I have those means. I've seen those means. Some of them are not successful because of the serendipity issue that Dave mentioned. And just this spontaneity. You can be walking around, and then you strike a conversation with somebody, and they're not trying to sell you anything, but you talk to them, and all of a sudden things click, click, click. And this is the same thing in the VC world. You see it at a cocktail party, and somebody gives you the idea for the better mousetrap. And that's where I think that I'm skeptical about augmented reality and the other stuff. Yeah, we should try it, and yeah, we should experiment with it. But I'm a veteran of where I heard about how virtual trade shows were going to be so good back in the days of Vaughn magazine, which is 20 years ago. Sonny, get off my lawn. So, I'm skeptical about that. What I would like to see and like to encourage, Greg, as you go down this path, is that we're doing a lot of live events, pre-recorded events. I'd like to see that the transcripts that you actually get, printed, textual transcripts of events now, and that's not happening. And I'll admit that's somewhat for my own selfish recording thing, reporting pleasure. But I think there's a value to take some of the verbal discussions and generate them into a transcript that can be searched and work with for accessibility reasons, as Dave mentioned, and also just for documentation and more information that people can search from.
So let me just kind of build on what you're saying. Always respect healthy disagreements. I prefer not to use the word violent, but we could agree. We could agree to disagree. At the heart, it's a technology show, and so I think that as the show has grown over the years, it's trying to serve many different constituents. And so there are folks that are there that are looking for different things that you're looking for, and certainly, frankly, my clients are. They want advice on what the latest technology is as it applies to their business, whatever their business might be. It might be automotive, it might be CPG, it could be entertainment, it could be a host of different things, retail. And so the logistics of getting in and out, I used to give tours for a decade and stressed about how I was going to possibly navigate these halls for a group of C-suite executives to show them what they needed to get in and out. Now we have all the technology to make it much more enhanced experience. It doesn't take away from, if people want the serendipity, they can have the serendipity. The fact that we're using headphones from 10 years ago is antiquated for a show that's supposed to be leading the technology agenda, I think, for various industries. So that was my point about utilizing technology better at the show itself. And the other piece too is that maybe the remit for this particular show needs to be refined a bit. Is that it used to be, again, very much a marketplace for buyers and sellers, and now it is frankly a little bit confusing as to who it's trying to serve and who is the consumer in the Consumer Electronics Show. This is not VidCon or Comic-Con. These are not folks that are just sort of general enthusiasts that are looking to buy new things. There are folks that are representing different corporations for the most part that are looking to sell their wares or sell their vision. And so that's the respect that I look at this type of a show. And frankly, it's why so many journalists are interested in the show.
And Greg, in fact, just to interrupt you just for a second, the CTA is violently opposed, using that word again, to calling this the Consumer Electronics Show anymore. This is now CES. For a while, it was the International CES. Now it's just CES. They have totally backed away from the idea that it's consumer electronics. It's the technology show. So the name sticks, but it's not consumer electronics anymore. As you point out, you can take 20 different attendees, and each one of them is going for a different reason.
Well, we have some time left. Why don't we shift to an optimistic note from our kind of pessimistic start? You three are going. I'm not. Hopefully, you could be my eyes and ears at the show. So tell me, what are the three things you're most looking forward to seeing, experiencing, talking about, tweeting about? I'll start with you, David. Are there three technologies, companies, demos that you really want to see at CES?
That's a great question, and I was actually a little bit disappointed in the folks at the CTA for not embracing this remote home, this remote worker concept that we've now all lived with for 2 years. It looks like working from home and hybrid working is going to be the future. I was
trying to be optimistic here, and you started.
I am being optimistic because we've all learned. Look at how we're dressed in t-shirts, and I'm wearing my jacket over a polo.
I'm wearing my best Marvel shirt that I bought.
You're wearing your Marvel, and Hawkeye and the Matrix is on today. But my point is that I'm going to. There is no central place to look at this. There's going to be little bits of it sprinkled in smart home, little bits of it sprinkled in the telehealth and telemedicine area, all around the show. So I'm really looking for how is the home going to morph from a place where we came at the end of the day and then went to work or just raised our kids to a place that's going to be a hybrid for us working and living and being productive. And what are the technologies? So it isn't in a specific pavilion this year. I'm looking at advertisers while we were chatting. I'm on the media email list. The last one came in about how to extend 5G coverage without using power. We are still, it's such an anachronism that if you look on Twitter, you're looking about all these people saying they're not going to attend the show. And if you look at the email list from the media list, you're getting 15 emails an hour about, are you coming? Come look at us. Come look at this. We're showing our stuff. So I'm definitely going to be looking for how smart technologies and home hybrid technologies are going to start to change and take over things. I'm definitely interested in autonomous vehicles. I'm really interested in what happened to my beloved Riviera now that it's going to have the car shows in it, and that's the new hall this year. So I got to take the Boring Company tunnel over just to see what it's
like.
Look at
you. You're like a kid in a candy store.
That's the kid in a candy store piece.
In a candy store. What about you, Doug? What are you most excited about? I'm sure there's rockets and aircraft of some kind on the list at CES this year.
I'm too lazy to get up and do the full dance and turn on the music, but I think number one would be Sierra Space and seeing the full scale Dream Chaser spacecraft. That's going to be front and center at Central Hall in the parking lot. So I'm interested to see how Sierra Space presents themselves in a consumer. I said the word consumer in a broader forum. And number one, and also seeing how what CES has done with this space tech tag. I realize we're supposed to be happy here, but Sierra Space is the only big space company that's going to be there this year, and I'm kind of it's an area where CES needs to do more work if they want to play with a flag of space tech. So that's number one. Number two is that pull Irma in here because I want to talk about health tech. Health tech is going to be fascinating because we've had 2 years of people working on telehealth and wearables and AI to dig through all that data and new solutions and the solutions that were in the pipeline at CES 2 years ago that are now coming into fruition, like things like being able to read your glucose level without or your blood pressure through a watch that doesn't look like something that's a gauntlet. So I'm interested to see the evolution of health tech, both from a COVID perspective as well as from a technology perspective. I'm waiting to see that. And then I think category 3 is going to be an all of the above, meaning, I throw out some buzzwords. AI and how that's being applied, and whether or not AI is a marketing buzzword that's being applied to some of the things I'm seeing or actual real. B, autonomous vehicles. I keep on getting pitches for technology connected into autonomous vehicles. So I'm interested to see how that falls in the new West Hall, and how that's presented. And then I think thirdly, I've gotten a lot of email and pitches from Eureka Park, especially from the international pavilions, such as Netherlands, France, and Japan. I mean, free food and drink from all those folks. So God bless them all. But I'm interested to see how many of those are committed to attend. Like I talked with someone yesterday, the day before, who's coming in from the Netherlands, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to be at CES unless you guys stop, unless the US doesn't let me in. So the people that are coming internationally, they are hardcore committed to talk to folks at CES. And that's especially true if from some of the companies representing in Asia, because you have situations in China where if you leave China, it's like a 2 to 3 week quarantine period before you can do anything. And that's, so there's a sacrifice of time and convenience there before that. And similarly in Japan, I've talked to some folks in Japan that they aren't coming to the US in the next 2 to 3 months because they're worried about getting locked out of their country.
Yeah.
And if you're coming over here and you're going to take a risk that you're going to, you really want to be here. And if that's the case, then I really want to talk to you because you have a good message where you have good things to share.
That's great. Well, Doug, I'm officially deputizing you as my eyes and ears of CES. The only requirement is you have to strap my smartphone to your forehead to live stream everything at the show, but that's only a minor detail. Greg, what about you? What are the top 2 or 3 things you're personally looking forward to?
Evan, tons of things to be optimistic about in the tech industry. Slight spin on what David and Doug said. Rather than autonomous vehicles, I'm looking at electric and connected vehicles. So less about the automation component and more about what you're going to do in the car and the sustainability aspects of the car. I think there's really exciting things that are happening, particularly with the infrastructure bill, the physical infrastructure bill being passed. So that I would say that's number one. The second is buzzword central, but metaverse. So I think the melding of the hardware and software components, headsets with the media industry, gamification is going to be fascinating to see, how that all comes together at CES. So that would be number 2. And number 3, and I'm more hopeful to get into conversations about this, I would say crypto and the NFT side of things. So fintech, just coming on the heels of Art Basel in Miami, there's so much exciting conversation around it, and just sort of the overall notion of kind of where we're heading in the blockchain. So those are the 3 areas that I'm optimistic about. And David, we'll have to definitely talk. I've reframed what I call the smart home is now the digital home, which is the manifestation of all of these different areas coming together from gamification and connected fitness to automation and security and doorbells and lighting, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a lot happening there, but really that hinges on the standard matter coming to fruition in the first quarter of this year, which it's supposed to be. So those are the areas that I'm interested in. But Evan, so much excitement again in the tech industry, and I'm not going to use the C word, and as we call it anymore. And in going into CES, it's all going to just be about emerging media and tech.
And none of you guys were honest enough to talk about how important that it's swag. This is a beautiful USB stick that I got from the team at China, which I'm still afraid to plug into any of my computers later. But it is beautiful. So
that was brought to you by Huawei, courtesy of the CCP.
Nice ornament. So yeah, good swag.
Case, I want to have this exact group, maybe more, together after the show. We'll do a post show, like NFL, like wrap up, and we'll get all the insights and learning. So thanks, gentlemen. We'll try to find an actual lady to include in this next discussion. Sorry for all the great women in tech, but it is what it is today. And we'll see you soon. Stay safe, wear a mask, wash your hands, all that crap, and have a great show, guys.
Happy holidays.
All
Take
right.
care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah, that's it.
Happy holidays, guys.
All that good stuff.